Thank you all for joining us today. Today I'm with Darin Mann, who, if you're at all involved in the political scene in Utah, you've heard the name before, and if you haven't, well, now's your lucky day. Darin is a huge part of the community here, just a stalwart steam engine of reform and participation.
Do what I can.
Do what he can, yeah. So Darin's a friend, and thought it would be an interesting perspective to share. So thanks for being here, Darin.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah. Can you give us a little intro about yourself, because mine was a bit botched? We'd like to hear a little bit more about your background, your philosophy.
Sure.
What led you to be here, sitting on my couch today?
I mean, I've been engaged in community organizing since I was, for about a decade now, so a third of my life. Whether it was like helping people with Parkinson's disease, organizing for Bernie Sanders, and then I became an environmental lobbyist to advocate and save rivers, and that got me into farming. And then through farming, I connected with permaculture circles, and then started working closely with my buddy Michael Kundick and the SLC Architectors, helped found that organization, and lobbied for them and different bills to help open up restrictions that limited people's ability to be successful in urban farming. And just advocated for clean air and stuff on the Capitol Hill. I would take people up to the Capitol, teach them how to be citizen lobbyists. You've come up there with me before. I just kind of organized in that. And then about 2 years ago, I created the Village Cooperative, which was an urban farm, which is its main function is to build resilient communities and educate people about cooperative economics. And so the first avenue towards that is meeting people's basic necessities. So that's food, shelter, sleep. If you're going by Maslow's hierarchy, on the road towards self-actualization. So we started with food, and then eventually through our mission, we started getting more and more involved in unsheltered communities, and that's what kind of led us to start a homeless camp in the beginning of this year in our front yard for the whole world to see. And it's been a trip. So that's kind of my journey, because I just believe that as a permaculturist, the time is now to build a regenerative future, one in which we all thrive and can live in dignity. And so sharing our resources and our labor with each other to build regenerative ecosystems that allow for food forests and life to flourish everywhere throughout the city. I think we can really start to redesign and rethink our society, both on an ecological sense and also in a societal sense. How do we treat each other? How do we interact? And I want to go more towards decentralization of power and localizing our communities. That's why the Village Cooperative, our mission is to build nodes that feed 3-block radiuses, because it's much more manageable to interact with your neighbors and have relationships with your neighbors, and decide things on the community level if you're servicing that area. And then you build more nodes out. This year we'll have 5 different nodes in the Rose Park area. So we're growing quite a bit. It's just little nodes of distribution, and where we have power, because if we're not getting our food from big conglomerates and things like that, our voting power, not only just from the ballot box, but also just economically increases, because the money is being recycled back into our communities and not going to these huge corporate entities. So it's just kind of decentralizing and taking away from these tyrannical monopolies like Walmart and all these other corporations, Amazon and things like that. Let's go back to localities and interacting with those spaces. And so that's been my trip for definitely the last little while. So.
That was an amazing intro.
Yeah.
How you've been doing it for a minute.
Yep. Live and breathe it. It's funny. My friends always joke, because I'll take a nap, and then I'll wake up, especially in the middle of summer. And my friend always loves to tell this story, because he's like, yeah, Darren's just sleeping, and then he jumps up and he goes, I planted too much kale. Oh, too much kale. You know, so I'm like, I can't even get away from it in my dreams. You know, so yeah.
What a terrible problem to have, planting too much kale.
Yeah. Yep. So it's a fun journey, and I'm grateful for the life that I live, and I meet fucking cool people like you. Can we cuss on here?
We can cuss on here.
Okay. So yeah, so I meet really, really cool people that are doing a lot of really cool things, and so it's just how do we mold this all together to really strengthen all of our individual lives and self-actualize to our greatest potential, both spiritually and materially.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I love about you and have always been impressed by, I mean, I first heard of you when you were running for office. What were you? It was like a...
State House Representative.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And I heard your name and assumed you were some, like, old person. I'm like, what? This guy's my age. Like, what?
Yep.
And then seeing you involved in the permaculture community and doing the lobbying thing and realizing that, like, what I was saying is that I admire that rather than just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. You're like, let's change things. Let's do it. Let's go.
Yep.
And what I learned from you is that it's much easier to get involved than I had assumed. Like, I just showed up there not knowing anything other than that this is a thing that I want to see changed in the community, and then being around people who know more than you and showing you how to do it, it empowered me. Mm-hmm. And I hope that people can see that all of us want change, and we're all capable of affecting it if we can, know how to organize and know how to put forth our effort. And half of it's just showing up. We don't have to have these big grandiose plans for how to change the world and how to start a node and how to be a permaculture farmer in your own house. It's like, it doesn't even take that. It just takes showing up and being around people who have been doing it longer than you have, and then your personal abilities and flavor and energies will be directed in a way that's unique to you, which is really cool.
Yeah.
We've talked about permaculture a tiny bit on this show. For those who aren't familiar with permaculture, it seems to be now a kind of central part of your mission.
Yeah.
Could you give us the permaculture pitch? What's your dream of a better society? What are you working for? What gets you up in the morning?
So it's essentially the remembering of indigenous earth practices, working in tandem with nature, and being stewards of the earth, as a Christian LDS background, we got to be stewards of the earth. So it's like permaculture really fits with that, and it's like I envision like the Garden of Eden, what that kind of looked like, and so it's humanity kind of reclaiming their role of like being a part of the natural systems rather than dominating it, and so it's starting to redevelop your relationship with nature and steward. A key tenet of permaculture is observation, right? You don't want to. Most permaculturists advocate, like, if you get a land and you start stewarding the land, they say that you should just sit and observe the land for a year. You shouldn't touch it, and get to know, where the shadows are, where the sun hits, where water falls and slants, and what are your elevations, and really get familiar with it, and then start, like planting different plants and working with indigenous plants and water-wise, and learning how to navigate those spaces, and just really increasing your connection, both, again, materially and spiritually. Permaculture is definitely a spiritual practice of like reconnecting with the energies and the vibrations of the plant and the natural world around you, and so that and that bleeds also into your interactions with other human beings, because you have different zones within permaculture. It goes like zone 1 to 5, but there's also zone 0, which is yourself. What is your relationship to yourself? How are you, are you caring for yourself? Do you have bad habits? And then you start to go out to the other zones.
Is 5 like interstellar?
No, 5 is like wild forest.
Okay.
So zone 1 is like your herb garden, and stuff that you use a lot. Zone 2 would be like where you plant all your tomatoes and your kale and stuff like that. And then zone 3 would be like potatoes, where you keep all of your animals, like your goats, your pigs, your chickens. And then zone 4 is, where you're it's pretty wild and not really touched by humans, but like you may be harvesting wood from there and like natural resources that you'll use at the farm, And then 5 is really untouched, like you're not really trying to interact with it too much. And so those zones are just different levels of thinking. And then they also have, I'm really trying to condense permaculture because it's like a big philosophy, but like they also have like this Venn diagram, which is like at the center of thinking for permaculturists. And so there's earth care, people care, and care for the future, right? And then right in the center of that diagram is permaculture. That's what you're trying to strive for. And most permaculturists, from my experience, focus on earth care, myself included. I think we're starting to branch out more into people care. There's a lot of like empathic people and artists are stepping up and starting to do like nonviolent communications, like Kelli Case, right? She's like at the forefront of like caring for nature, but also like really starting to talk about what people care looks like.
Yeah, Kelli and I did an interview about nonviolent communication. I'll put the link in the description
box.
Oh,
cool. Yeah, yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, I love
yeah, and then it all bleeds into care for the future, because I think it was Nietzsche that said it, where it was like, the higher man, or higher person, I guess, to make it more modern, because the higher person plants the seeds of a tree of which you'll never see the shade of, right? So that's kind of the goal. You're cultivating a forest, and hopefully your children and grandchildren can thrive in that. And you'll get to see the fruits of plant a fruit tree. You're gonna get to see it. It takes a little longer here than if we were in Georgia, for example. But in 10 years, you'd have a really healthy apple tree.
Yeah.
But to kind of bring it back to your point of like empowerment, is just like those in power thrive from us thinking that it's so daunting to like make a change. And like it's really as simple as just like starting to plant kale or indigenous crops and like interacting with your neighbor. You don't have to do anything big or grandiose. Like you don't have to create farming nodes, but you can interact with your neighbor or come volunteer with groups like mine or others, and like you said, just show up, and then who knows how you would blossom yourself as an organizer. Maybe you're the leader that we all need, and you just showing up and starting to interact in a small way will open up a door towards a bigger, greater pathway. So
oh yeah. I love that you describe it as like a spiritual paradigm, and that's kind of a loaded word, especially for our audience that has a lot of like religious trauma. But it really is about understanding that our individual identities can't be separated from the greater collective, both socially and environmentally. That these are all parts of what we are, and our personal health is dependent on our social health, our ecological health. And so putting that at the focus, and like you were saying, in contrast to the powers that be, I get so tired, and I know you do too, about this like left versus right, and like it's either crony capitalism or Soviet communism. Those are the only two options. And as someone who has at least at some point identified as a socialist, would you adopt that, or have?
I would say I'm a
democratic socialist.
Yeah, I would say I'm a libertarian socialist.
I would too.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying. Don't you see that it's a big circle and they meet back on the other side?
Yep. Yeah, because through empowering all of us, we can empower the individual towards self-actualization, right? Because I do like my individuality. I like to express my individuality, and I like to watch others express their individuality, and like. There's a certain level of conformity that can be dangerous. So like it's good to have like people express and like break boundaries and do offensive things sometimes, and like because that's what sparks you to think, and then you're like, and then maybe you come up with some big project because you were inspired, because you were made uncomfortable. Like some of the most profound art that I've seen is like, I was in Spain at the Guggenheim, and there's basically, you're in this like highbrow museum, and there's basically just a porno going on, and I was just like, what the hell, where am I? And it was so jarring, but it was like, it was cool to be jarred. Like it was like, oh wow, I didn't think like in a mainstream museum I would be seeing this.
Genuinely provocative art.
Yeah. And you don't know what will tug on your heartstrings at any given moment. So our ability to self-express should be fostered, just like a plant. You got to pull the weeds and make sure the foliage is good and constantly fertilize it and whatnot. So if we look at it as our society as like a row of crops, we're constantly cultivating each other and making sure the weeds don't overtake. And the weeds would be like self-doubt or bullying or criticism of each other. And we should be fostering an environment where we're uplifting each other and helping each other grow to their fullest, And so like that's just one way that I try and look at it. So I try and have a lens of like a care for the collective, but then also a care for individual growth. So.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand, and that we can't. The healing begins and ends with us. It's a personal thing. We work on ourselves as an offering to the community and our personal work. If we're all doing our personal work, we're all functioning better collectively, and it's not about because I feel like a socialist as well, in that I really believe in the power of the people to affect positive change. But that isn't always and can't always be through simple legislation, though being involved in the political process is of course important.
Yeah.
Because that's where decisions are being made, and we have to have a voice there and be more expressive and organized in expressing that voice. But also that we can't just sit around on our asses waiting for someone to give us a better life, that we can start doing things and organizing on our own.
Yeah.
And that's where you shine the most out of anybody I know. And like you said, Kandik and some of these other folks who are involved here is really impressive and inspiring. I want to talk about your current initiative, which has brought some publicity your way. Tell us about what you're doing with the unsheltered community right now.
Yeah. So we started a homeless camp in our front yard that's housed anywhere from 5 to 15 people. And it has been an incredible whirlwind of a ride. It's like a political disobedience of like highlighting this homeless camp is to highlight the issue of unsheltered communities and what they deal with, and also give them a sanctuary. Because like I was talking about earlier with, uplifting all of us as a community, these unsheltered camps have been pushed through constant abatements for months in the winter. And the homeless crisis has only gotten bigger, right? Because the city doesn't have adequate resources. They shut down one of the largest shelters. And so there's just not adequate resources. Because one of the things the city likes to tout is, oh yeah, there's beds available. And it's like, well, 5 beds doesn't help people. Like, I think it's like 2,500 homeless people in Salt Lake. It's like, yeah, you have beds. I feel like it's like a strategic way of like, you save 5 beds, so you're like, no, there's beds available. This camp is like a sanctuary to where they didn't have to worry about cops coming and moving them in the dead of night, and they're not constantly being harassed, and their items aren't being stolen from other people, and they kind of had a breather. So we had like no drugs and no violence, and it was really cool to see people flourish. Because another problem with the shelters is there's like all these barriers, where they're like, if they're in a coupling, if they have partners, they usually get separated. So people who are in romantic relationships usually don't want to go to shelters because they don't want to be separated, or they can't watch their stuff all the time, and they're victims of theft in these shelters, and there's just a lot of problems that can happen. Doesn't mean, shelters are good, but they do have their problems. And so this camp, which a camp is not a long-term solution either, right? Like, people are out in the elements. We did have a woman die
Wow.
Yeah, from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Yikes.
But again, it highlighted that issue because, they're like, oh, I can't believe a woman died. I'm like, yeah, I mean, we had 60 people die last year. So this is a reality of what it's like to live unsheltered lives. And she died from carbon monoxide poisoning, having some coals in her tent, trying to keep herself warm.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is the reality. And now because it's in somebody's front yard that's in your neighborhood, you can't ignore it anymore. You have to address it because, we have homeless camps all over the Fair Park, Rose Park area where I live, but people just kind of ignore them. They walk by and their camps are kind of hidden along the Jordan River Parkway or in nooks and crannies. But I'm on the corner right next to a park. Like, I'm the only house with this farm, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have this homeless camp of like 10 tents, and people have to look at it and talk about it. And so we just got huge support of like donations and whatnot. And then you had, the home flippers and the people worried about their property values not being too happy and stoked about it. But then, and it was just like the cognitive dissonance, because they're like, well, I don't want my neighborhood to look like that. And I was like, the unsheltered people were here already.
Yeah, this is your neighborhood.
Yeah. I was like, they're here already. They're camped along North Temple, which is 4 blocks away from my house. They're everywhere, and we're just ignoring the problem. So if you really want to, increase the quality of life and gentrify, it's like we have to address the problem. That's how I would argue with these people that are worried about their property values and stuff.
And what about the value of human life?
Exactly. But the cognitive dissonance of they would just be like, we'll send them to a shelter. That's like the common thing, and it's like, but again, like I talked about, there's not enough beds. 5 beds does not accommodate everyone. And so after the passing of my friend Brandy, we were always talking about creating a tiny home village with a allotted space to camp, and so that we could start like a 2-year program and get people into semi-permanent tiny home housing with urban farming initiative, to where it could self-fund the project and teach people how to manage CSAs, how to manage a farm, and different volunteers and employees, and of course follow our cooperative model of having paid memberships to, again, self-fund the project, with a community center where they could have communal showers and access to, drug rehab, drug addiction services and mental health services, but a lower barrier, and with tiny homes, you could have coupling stay there, couples, because that's what I noticed. These people staying at my camp, they usually had like a day or two where they wouldn't come out of their tents, and they were going through heavy decompression, and then they started to realize how quiet it was at my home, because there's not cop cars coming by, there's not, like, it was quiet and peaceful. And in some of the articles, they interviewed some of the unsheltered people, and that's what they would say. This is where the peace is at. Like, it's like a sanctuary, because it's really what it was like. And then next thing you know, they pop out of their tent and they're like, hey, Darin, how can I help? And without me even asking, they're like starting to rake up the gardens and get it ready for spring. And they helped me build a chain link fence, because I wanted to separate, be like, okay, this front yard is your space and this is my space, because I think boundaries are important, right? So I was like, I'll respect you, you respect me, and I was very clear on that. And I gave them their autonomy and to be, right? And so in a way, they were allowed to reclaim their humanity, and they weren't just, because a lot of unsheltered people, when I talk to them about shelters, they're like, I feel like I'm being treated like an animal. And so just kind of giving them their own sovereignty, they flourished. And that was beautiful. So I want to replicate that at a more, because I couldn't have a homeless camp on my property forever, right? So I want to use this experience and use the energy that we cultivated and transition it to cultivate funding and get a tiny home community going to address homelessness, but then also it could change the way that we develop our cities, you know, as a whole, which would be, in my mind, a dream, you know, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
A pretty big and inspiring undertaking, and yet when it gets down to it, it's totally doable and feasible. Really inspiring. I was getting emotional as you talked, just because, I don't know, I remember learning about the caste system in India and being like, that's so nuts that they have these 3 different ones, and there's like a whole class of people you're not even allowed to touch and address, and it's like, newsflash, that's here. We have a caste system here. Yeah. And the unsheltered community is a perfect example of that. You know, we don't want to see it. We don't want to touch. We don't want to interact. We don't want to make eye contact. We don't want to offer too much, because then, you know, you could ask for more, and then it'll require all this effort on my part. And it's like, most people just want to be treated like people and seen as human beings. And as an artist, I mean, I'm lucky to have a network of supportive people who I think would have my back in a pinch, but you know, I barely get by, and sometimes I think, you know, I'm one disaster away from being where these people are. Yeah. And if I can't look at that with seriousness and respect that these are fellow human beings who, for whatever reason, have found themselves in a difficult situation, and that it's not going to be my disgust and judgment that's going to get them out of it by just pushing, you know, them away as the problem rather than the societal factors that are helping the problem flourish. And so this reimagination of our society as an integrated whole, where we're looking after the least vulnerable, or the most vulnerable among us, is really inspiring. I think that's the essence of Christianity, and it's funny to be in a state that is so Christian, and yet the contrast between the, you know, theory and the practice is so laughably distant that it's really inspiring to see people like you actually living it.
I was arguing with my neighbor, one of my neighbors who was not in supportive, and I was like, "Oh, that's nice. Well, go to church on Sunday and then be surprised that you have a homeless camp in your neighborhood on Monday." You know, but another thing is like, I was asking. So I had this guy. He's such a gem. He's schizophrenic and he's homeless, and he was at my camp, and I was asking him, well, what could I do better? Like, is there anything I could do? And he's like, you're doing everything you can. And then I'm not very good at quoting scriptures, but he quoted, he's like, no, you clothed me, fed me, and sheltered me. That Jesus
Master,
quote.
When saw we thee hungry or thirsty?
And it brought me to tears, because I was like, man, that's cool, because, you know, like, I definitely have my trauma with Christianity and the church, but like, there's things that touch my heart in the Bible and stuff like that. And so that was just a profound moment for me, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's kind of like you're just trying to strive to be the best you can be. And so that was really cool to have that guy kind of bring that home for me. I was like, oh yeah, I am kind of trying to be like Jesus. No, but no, it was cool just to have that moment of humanity, and so many neighbors were coming by and like dropping off food, propane, and like really supportive. And so that was cool to see the like, you know, I've kind of been talking about the negative neighbors, because unfortunately sometimes the negative aspects
always take up more bandwidth.
They take up your mind, but like the positivity of, like, you know, like people are like, oh, I just made spaghetti and I want to bring it out, or chili. So much chili. People were just making chili and bringing it out, and it was really cool to just kind of have that community support. And it was like, we can do this, you know? And again, it just made my life a lot easier. Like, oh, you know, a woman making a bunch of spaghetti for people that I'm caring for in my front yard, it just alleviates so much more stress. So it goes back to that, what can you do? She just made some food, and it helped me and the cause and these 15 people exponentially, right? It helped alleviate my stress. It helped feed all these people and uplift the morale of them, the neighborhood, and she got to interact with these unsheltered people. And so just that little small act was like really profound, and it may not seem like it, but it is, you know. And that was cool. That's it's like a cool moment.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So,
well, thank you so much for your efforts in this arena and in all the other ones you're involved with. You have a GoFundMe for this project for this tiny home community, which I think is brilliant. And hopefully we'll all be in tiny homes someday. We'll see. I would love a tiny home.
Yeah, and there is something like, there's this woman, Ksenia, she's a good friend of mine. I don't know if you know her, but you talk about humanizing the cast. For years since I've known her, she always is like hugging and kissing on the homeless, inviting them into her home and whatnot. And she actually started a nonprofit, the Nomad Alliance, that does like supply drops. Might be worth like getting her perspective on like humanizing the invisible, right? But you know, that's here nor there. But she's actually helping with the GoFundMe for the tiny home community. So I wanted to give her a shout out.
Good to know. See if I can get around here.
But please share the GoFundMe and follow the Village Cooperative on Facebook and Instagram and all that jazz. So
cool. We'll have all the links in the description box so people can just be one click away.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Darin. You're a light in this community.
Thanks, man.
And really an inspiration to me and to many others. And hope we can all be a part of the change that's happening, because we know that we need change. This last year in the political arena, what we're seeing happen now with the true like collapse of our environment, change needs to happen. And it's people like you, like us, all doing the little parts that we can. No one has to do all of it, but that's how change happens. So thank you so much for spearheading and being such a force. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's much easier to push a boulder together. So.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Have a good one.